Hello there. Welcome to Dreamside Stories. Today, we begin a new journey. A gentle walk through the kitchens, taverns, and traditions of the medieval world. This is Living in the Middle Ages, an 8-part series about everyday life long ago. Across these episodes will explore the rhythms of the village, the warmth of homes, and the beliefs that shaped generations. Each chapter whispers a piece of the past, quiet moments, humble routines, and timeless rituals. This is Episode 2. Food and Feasting. Let's begin. In the Middle Ages, food was never just food. It was survival, ritual, identity, a measure of one's place in the world. What and when people ate depended on the season, their rank, their faith, and the land beneath their feet. A peasant's meal and a noble's feast were not just different in quantity or flavor. They reflected entirely different lives. The day began early. Before light crept across the fields, smoke already drifted from thatched chimneys. Fires were coaxed back to life from yesterday's coals, and water was drawn from the well. Most families lived on a diet dominated by grain, bread, pottage, and whatever was gathered or stored. There was little room for indulgence. Breakfast was sparse, if it happened at all. In many places, the first real meal came closer to midday, once the day's work was underway. Food was functional. It filled the belly and fueled the body. Still, there was rhythm. There was pattern. The village calendar turned with the soil. Sowing, reaping, fasting, feasting. Food marked time as surely as any bell tower. For peasants, most meals were eaten cold, often alone or in silence. A crust of bread dipped in broth, leeks or onions from a garden. Cheese if the cow had given enough. Salted herring, dried beans, or when lucky, a few eggs. Wine was rare. Ale was common. Water was sometimes feared. But even in hardship, meals had meaning. A shared bowl. A prayer. The scrape of a spoon on a wooden dish. These were the sounds of life continuing. And though hunger was common, the memory of food lingered. The smell of baking bread, the taste of wild berries in summer, the rare sweetness of honey. These small things stayed with people, shaping their sense of home. For the rich, meals were performances, acts of power. Servants moved silently, placing trenchers and pitchers, carving meats, pouring wine. A noble might eat 3 courses, each with several dishes. Roasted meats, stews with spices, fresh fruit, tarts, and rich sauces. The table was a theater of abundance, watched by many and experienced by few. But no matter one's station, food had its rules. Religion dictated much. Fridays meant no meat. Lent brought long fasts. There were times of celebration and times of restraint. The church calendar and the agricultural calendar ran parallel, shaping not just what people ate, but when, and how, and why. To understand medieval food is to understand medieval life itself, shaped by work, watched by faith, bound by nature. As we walk deeper into this world, remember that food was never just taken for granted. It was earned, grown, preserved, shared. It was, in every sense, life. Much of what was eaten depended on where one lived. Coastal regions had more access to fish and salt, while inland villages relied on grains and root vegetables. Forests offered nuts, mushrooms, and game, though hunting was often reserved for the nobility. Still, traps and snares provided an occasional rabbit or bird, despite the risks of poaching. In the countryside, the growing and preparing of food was a shared responsibility. Children collected eggs or fetched water, while women baked, churned, and preserved. Men harvested, ground grain, or brewed ale. Meals were not quick affairs. They were the result of hours of labor and planning. Preservation was a constant concern. Salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting were essential skills. A poorly preserved barrel of fish could mean weeks of hunger. So could a failed harvest. That's why grain stores were guarded carefully, and famine remained a silent fear behind. Every meal, despite hardship, communal meals brought warmth. Families gathered around the hearth. Even in silence, there was comfort in company. Sometimes a traveling peddler would bring spices or stories, and both were welcome at the table. Food was also tied to superstition. Certain herbs were thought to protect against illness. Garlic warded off evil. Bread was never to be placed upside down, and spilling salt could invite misfortune. Meals were not only physical, they were spiritual. And yet, even in this modest world, there were moments of joy. A sweet apple in autumn, a slice of pie at a wedding, the clink of wooden cups at the end of a feast. These were more than meals. They were memories. This is where we begin, not with castles or kings, but with the quiet reality of everyday life, lived one bite at a time. The day starts early. Long before the sun rises, the farmer is awake. Not because of a rooster, but because the work won't wait. It's cold. The kind of cold that seeps through wool and clings to the floor. He wraps a cloak over his tunic and steps outside. The yard is quiet, but not silent. A dog stirs. A cart creaks in the distance. Frost crackles underfoot. The animals are first. They need feeding before anything else. Chickens flap and complain. The cow snorts, waiting for hay. A bucket drops into the well with a hollow splash. His breath hangs in the air like smoke. Back inside, the hearth still smolders from last night. He stirs the ashes, blows, adds kindling. The fire returns slowly, stubborn and orange. His wife is already kneading dough. A child stirs on a straw mat, blinking at the light. There is no breakfast table, just stools, a bench, and hands that keep moving. The bread is not yet ready, so he dips stale crust into warm ale and chews. It's rough, but it's enough. Outside, the village is waking up. Doors open, smoke rises, tools clink. No one talks much in the morning. Everyone has their own rhythm. The farmer shoulders his hoe. Today is for tilling, or maybe mending a fence, maybe clearing a path. He'll decide once he sees the field. The land tells him what's needed. He walks past neighbors. They nod. One waves. A child runs past, chasing a chicken. Someone coughs behind a shutter. By the time the sun crests the hill, he's already sweating. Earth turns beneath his hands. The same soil his father worked. The same path he's walked every day since boyhood. His wife brings a cloth-wrapped bundle, a small mid-morning meal, a boiled egg, a bit of cheese, and the heel of yesterday's bread. She doesn't stay long. There's laundry to do, or wool to card, or a neighbor to help. He eats under a tree, alone but not lonely. He watches. The sky, the birds, the shape of the clouds. These small things matter. They tell him what's coming. Rain, wind, maybe frost. The food is gone quickly. He wipes his hands on his tunic and gets back to work. This is how the day begins. Not with plans or meetings, but with movement, with habit, with purpose. It's not glamorous, but it's real, the kind of morning that shaped 1,000 years. Work doesn't pause for conversation. The rhythm is in the motion. Lifting, turning, placing. The body knows what to do, even when the mind is somewhere else. He thinks of his father, now gone. Of the time he dropped a whole basket of turnips and got scolded. Of the time he stood in the field during a storm, arms out, daring the sky to crack. That wild feeling has faded, but the memory remains. By midday, the sun is high and unforgiving. He removes his cloak and wipes his brow. The soil is drier than expected. He'll have to fetch more water for the patch behind the fence. A neighbor shouts a warning about a loose pig. He nods. That can wait. The meal at noon is simple, but filling. Pottage, thick and warm, ladled from the pot that hangs above the fire. Cabbage, barley, maybe a scrap of salted meat. It tastes like the week, like work, like home. His youngest daughter offers him a pear. Half ripe, but sweet. He bites and smiles. After the meal, there's no rest. There are gates to check, fences to mend, tools to clean. The fields don't fix themselves, and time never slows. In the distance, the chapel bell rings. Not for him, not yet. Maybe later. When the light softens, when the tools are stacked and the sky turns orange. He moves on instinct now. Hands calloused, legs aching, back stiff. But the work is honest, and it fills the day. As afternoon fades, he carries a bundle of kindling home. Smoke already curls from chimneys. A child waves from a doorway. A woman calls out about the coming weather. He raises a hand in reply. Back home, the hearth is alive. Again. The room smells of stew. The children squabble over who gets the stool nearest the fire. He sets down the wood and removes his boots. Dinner is quieter, slower. Less hunger, more conversation. They speak of the day, of broken tools and stubborn goats, of a friend's baby born last night. Outside, the sky deepens. Stars blink awake. Somewhere a dog barks. He steps outside for a moment, just to breathe, just to listen. The day is ending, but it will come again and again. For now, that's enough. Baking day in the medieval village wasn't just about bread. It was about rhythm, ritual, and the warm pulse of community life. The day began before dawn. A girl wakes to the clatter of grain being ground, the shuffle of feet outside, the cool sting of stone beneath bare feet. Outside, the air is quiet but charged. Today is baking day, a moment anchored deep in the cycle of the week. She helps her grandmother knead a heavy mass of dough, sticky and stubborn. Her hands, still small, learn the press, the fold, the stretch. Water is carried, fires kindled, bread is life, and the whole house leans into its making. By sunrise, a steady rhythm fills the village. Across courtyards and kitchen hearths, women and children gather around great wooden bowls. Kneading is shared, not just between generations, but between households. Flour-dusted fingers press deep into dough, pushing love and muscle into every loaf. There's laughter too, and murmurs about weather, marriages, and feast days to come. Baking is not only work, it's conversation, community, a bond of grain and fire. Throughout the day, dough rises in covered baskets, warm under woolen blankets. Chickens peck nearby, cats curl in corners. Outside, neighbors walk narrow lanes, checking ovens, sharing bits of dough and salt, offering help when flour runs thin. Someone hums an old tune. Someone tells a joke. Somewhere a bell tolls softly. Ovens, large and communal, stand at the edge of the square. Their stones glow hot from early morning. Villagers bring their shaped loaves wrapped in cloth or marked with a carved stick, a sign of ownership and pride. The oven tender, often an elder or appointed baker, tends the fire, judges the heat, places each loaf with care. A child watches the coals, hypnotized by the crackle and shifting orange light. The smell arrives before the bread, warm, nutty, rich. It drifts over rooftops, calls to those still working the fields, draws them inward. It is a smell that means safety, effort rewarded, another day endured. Bread, when it finally emerges, is both humble and sacred. Brown, coarse loaves made from barley, rye, or oat. Occasionally wheat if the harvest was kind. The crusts are thick, sometimes scored with family initials, or prayers cut by blade. On special days, there is honey in the dough, or crushed herbs, for taste. A feast day might see white bread, rare and soft, baked only for lords or offered at church. But not all loaves are equal. On lean weeks, bread is stretched with bean flour or even acorns. It tastes earthy, heavier. Yet it fills, and that is enough. Resilience is baked into every slice. By midday, the air hums with voices. Children carry home small round loaves, proud as kings. Elders bless the oven, whispering thanks. Some trade extra loaves for eggs or dried apples. Some keep theirs hidden, saving for tomorrow. And in one house, the girl who rose at dawn now wipes flour from her cheeks and shares a heel of hot bread with her grandmother. No butter, no jam, just warmth. Evening settles. The ovens cool, ashes are swept. Stories are told. A man sings as he carries 2 loaves under his arm. A woman balances a basket on her hip, trailing children behind. Someone calls good night. Someone laughs too loud. A dog barks once, then quiets. And baking day ends not with ceremony, but with calm. The slow, satisfied silence of full stomachs and steady hearts. There's no feast tonight, no music or dancing, just peace and the quiet crackle of cooling stone. Tomorrow brings chores, repairs, the chaos of life again. But tonight, bellies are full. Tonight the village rests, fed, connected, and alive in the scent of bread still clinging to the air. Spring tastes different from summer. Autumn holds things winter cannot. In the Middle Ages, to eat was to know the rhythm of the year, to taste time itself. There were no supermarkets, no imports from distant lands. What you ate depended on what the land allowed. The cycle of seasons dictated every ingredient, every meal. Preservation helped, but even salted meats and dried beans had their end. People planned meals around what grew, what ripened, what lasted. In spring, the hunger was deepest. The stores from last year were thin, the harvest still far away. But there was hope. Young greens like nettles, leeks, and wild garlic emerged. First, people foraged, often in groups, sharing what they found. A few eggs, now more frequent as hens laid again, might turn a weak soup into something comforting. Milk returned too, and with it, the chance to churn fresh butter or soft cheese, if only in small amounts. Summer brought more. Gardens and fields grew busy with work and reward. Beans climbed sticks, onions fattened, berries ripened in sun-drenched hedges. In good years, meals grew more varied. Barley and oats might be harvested early. The village baked more often. Ale turned sharper. Even the children knew which trees offered cherries, which patches hid strawberries. Autumn was the time of plenty, the great harvest. Apples, cabbages, beans, and grains were gathered and stored. Meat was salted, fruits dried, herbs hung from rafters to cure. The whole village buzzed with activity, a rush against the clock before cold returned. Sometimes there was a small feast, just a meal with a little more bread, more laughter, more ale. But winter returned, always, and with it, caution. Meals grew simpler, stretched further. Pottage became thin. Dried peas, roots, and salted fish reappeared. Some days, only bread and ale. But even this had meaning. Meals were not always joyful, but they were shared. Firelight, the scrape of spoons, the quiet togetherness of endurance. Fast days added another layer. The church calendar shaped food choices as much as the soil. No meat on Fridays. Long weeks of Lent. Special saints. Days with their own meals or their own restrictions. Rich or poor, no one could escape the rhythms of faith. And yet, in every home, people made do. A stew flavored with thyme or sage. Bread with a dash of honey saved from summer. A bit of smoked meat, shaved thin, passed down the table. Even small, meals could hold joy. Food was also medicine. Garlic for the blood, onion for a cough, warm ale to settle the stomach. What the season offered, the people used. Not just to fill bellies, but to stay strong. The knowledge was old, passed through hands, not books. From mother to daughter, from neighbor to neighbor. Folk wisdom woven into daily life. Children learned early, not just how to eat, but when to harvest, how to preserve, how to test if something was spoiled, what to do when it was. Mistakes were costly. A bad barrel of grain might mean sickness or hunger. So everything was watched. Everything mattered. And when a good year came, it was remembered. People spoke of fat apples, thick cream, bright carrots. Of the time when there was enough salt to preserve a whole pig. Those memories stayed, especially through leaner times. The taste of luck, of abundance. Seasonal eating was not a choice. It was life. To live well was to know the signs. The frost, the bloom, the dry spell. To adjust, to hope, and to share. Food was never just eaten. It was grown, traded, blessed, mourned, celebrated. As the chapter closes, the scent of baked apples fills a kitchen. Outside, wind tugs at bare branches. A pot simmers, slowly. Bread rises again. A child counts the last pears in a wooden bowl, and another season waits. In wealthier homes, the rhythm was less harsh, but still seasonal. Nobles had access to preserved goods and spices, often brought from afar. Yet even they adjusted their tables to the calendar. A banquet in winter looked different than a feast in spring. Roast boar might appear near Christmas, pies with preserved fruits near Lent's end. Even indulgence had its seasons. Villages sometimes gathered for communal meals at turning points of the year. Planting, festivals, harvest gatherings, midwinter feasts, these moments brought more than food. They brought singing, dancing, prayer, and pause. A kind of breath between the labors. A reward. A reminder that not every day was the same. In the end, the seasons wrote the recipes. They taught restraint and celebration. They marked time, not in hours, but in herbs and grain, in frost and bloom. To live in the Middle Ages was to eat with the year, with patience, with memory, with hope. Market day comes like a heartbeat in the week, steady, expected. A break from the fields, but not from work. Before the sun rises, the village begins to stir. A cart creaks on the path. A woman bundles herbs in cloth. Chickens cluck, sensing movement. There's a quiet energy in the air. Not loud, but pulsing. You carry a basket. Everyone does. Some walk in pairs, others alone. It's not far, just beyond the last row of cottages. But it feels like a journey. The rhythm of steps. The sound of voices waking. The market square is small, but alive. Stalls rise like tents after rain. Cloth is pulled taut. Barrels set down with a thump. Wooden boards creak under jars and baskets. The well in the center gurgles softly. Vendors call softly, not shouting, just enough to be heard. Fresh eggs, apple vinegar, good rye. The words blend with the clink of cups, the rustle of sacks, the low hum of morning trade. A man sharpens knives at the edge of the square. His wheel sings. Sparks fly just a little. Children stop to stare, wide-eyed. A woman swats them gently forward. The baker has brought more than bread. There are rolls dusted with ash, flat cakes for travelers. A rare sweet bun wrapped in linen, likely for the steward or priest. You buy a crust, still warm. It softens in your hands. Smoke drifts from a small fire behind the meat cart. The butcher works with slow care. Salted strips hang nearby, caught in sunlight. A few flies buzz, but no one minds. Near the fountain, a friar holds a bowl. Coins drop in with hollow sounds. He nods in thanks. Once for each, a prayer slips quietly from his lips. You stop at a stall of herbs and dried flowers. Thyme, sage, lavender. A girl arranges them in neat bunches, fingers nimble. Her voice is soft, her smile practiced. You trade 2 eggs for a sprig of mint and a handful of dried nettle. There's a rhythm to it all. Not rushed, not slow. Just steady. The same hands passing goods. The same feet shifting weight. A conversation without words. Some come to sell. Some to trade. Others just to listen. To hear what's happened. A birth. A broken cart. A theft no one will name. News travels faster than carts. A boy chases a chicken under a stall. The vendor lifts her skirts and yells. Laughter follows. The chicken escapes. A woman displays dyed cloth in deep reds and muddy blues. Her hands move like water, folding, lifting, refolding. She offers a ribbon. You take it, just to feel. At the far end of the square, a stranger sets up slowly. His goods are odd. Colored stones, tiny bottles, carved figures of wood and bone. He speaks with an accent. No one buys yet, but people watch. Curious, cautious. The tax steward stands nearby, chalk in hand. He notes each trade, each sale. He doesn't smile, but he watches closely. A musician plays a slow tune on a wooden flute. It rises above the talk, weaving through the noise. A toddler claps. No one tells her to stop. By midday, the square softens. Some stalls empty. Others call out their final offers. A jug spills. Children run through the puddle. Mothers scold, but not harshly. You sit near the fountain. Your basket is lighter now. Inside, herbs, bread, 2 onions, and a small lump of cheese. Enough. A breeze picks up. The cloth above flutters. A dog sleeps in the shade of a stall. Smoke from the butcher's fire curls toward the sky. This is not a festival, not a feast, but it is a gathering, a pulse, a reminder that you are not alone in your hunger, your trade, your small joys. And soon, the stalls will fold, the carts will roll, the square will grow quiet again. But not yet. For now, the market lives. As the sun shifts higher, shadows shorten. A woman walks by with a basket of duck eggs, offering quiet trades. She knows who needs what. A barter here, a promise there. Trust keeps the market alive as much as coin does. You see someone from another village. He nods in greeting, holds up a jar of honey. You wave back. These are rare days when faces from beyond the woods appear, drawn by rumor, or shortage, or chance. Not far from the well, a child hands her mother a crooked carrot. The woman laughs. It's perfect, she says. It goes into the basket, among the turnips and beets. There are no loud announcements, but slowly the market fades, one stall at a time. The stranger with the carved bones disappears first, then the friar, then the cloth lady with her ribbons. You rise. Your feet are tired, your basket full enough. You walk the path home slowly. Behind you, voices thin. Ahead, the smell of stew from a distant hearth. And though the market is done, its echo lingers in your steps, your hands, your memory. It will come again, just like this, just like always. Not every day in the medieval world was a feast. In fact, many were days of fasting, quiet, restrained, shaped by faith. The church didn't just guide prayers, it guided meals. It told you what to eat, when to eat, and sometimes not to eat at all. Wednesdays and Fridays were fast days. So were the long weeks of Lent. Advent too, in some places. For much of the year, food wasn't about pleasure. It was about discipline, about humility. On fast days, meat was forbidden. Dairy too, depending on the region and the rules. Fish was allowed, but not always available. So people made do with what they had. Pottage without lard, bread without butter, a bit of dried apple, maybe onions, maybe leeks. But fasting wasn't just about hunger. It was spiritual, a way to reflect, to resist temptation, to align the body with the soul, to feel closer to the suffering of Christ. It was a ritual, like prayer. Not always joyful, but meaningful. In the village, fast days were quieter. People still worked, but there was a hush. No roasting fires, no thick stew bubbling over flames. The smell of food was lighter, the sound of chewing softer. Children learned early, not just the rules, but the reasons. They asked, "Why no meat?" and were told to remember. Not just Christ, but the poor, the hungry, the fragile thread that tied the seasons to the soul. Feast days came too, saints' days, holy days, celebrations after fasts. Then the table shifted. Then came roasted meats, honeyed bread, and wine, if the household could afford it. But even then, joy was balanced with prayer. In noble halls, fasting looked different. There were more options, more substitutes, fish with sauces, almond, milk in place of cream. Fancy, but still within the rules. For the poor, there was no such illusion. Fasting meant less. Sometimes it meant nothing at all. Yet no one questioned the rhythm. The church calendar was the village calendar. Bells rang to market. Priests preached it. Families lived by it. The year turned not just by harvest, but by holy obligation. Pilgrimage also shaped meals. When villagers walked for days to reach a shrine, they ate little. Bread, water, dried peas in a pouch. They gave thanks for what they had, and for what they hoped to receive. Forgiveness, healing, peace. Some women fasted beyond the church's call. For them, it was an act of devotion, of offering. They refused meat, even on feast days, ate only herbs and roots. Their bodies grew thin, but their faith, people said, grew strong. In the evening, a family gathered around a pot of watery soup. They held hands. They bowed heads. They spoke a prayer not of complaint, but of gratitude. Even for this. Even for little. Because to fast was to feel part of something larger. To join a rhythm older than memory. A rhythm of sacrifice, of patience, of waiting. The rules were many, but not without meaning. A spilled bowl might be a sign, a sudden craving, a test, a forgotten fast, a fault to confess. The seasons helped. Winter asked less. Summer gave more. And so the rhythms of nature and church walked, side by side. One fed the body, the other the soul. As the day ends, the hearth glows dimly. A single candle flickers. A bowl is scraped clean with bread. The last bit shared. Someone whispers a hymn. Another crosses themselves. No one speaks, loudly. No one needs to. Faith is in the silence, in the simplicity, in the fasting, and in the hope of tomorrow's feast. At the heart of it all stood the church. Not just the building, but the presence. Its rules reached every home, every hearth. People didn't need books to know what to do. The priest told them. The bells reminded them. Children marked time by taste, when the soup was thin, when butter was gone, when meat returned. These shifts taught them not only to obey, but to understand the weight of seasons shaped by faith. In every village, there was someone who knew the calendar by heart, an elder, a monk, a midwife. They reminded others when ember days came, when the fast began, when a saint's feast was near. Their memory was part of the food. Even during hardship, people kept the fast. Because it wasn't just about food. It was about being seen, known, part of something holy. Fasting turned the act of eating, or not eating, into a form of worship, a quiet kind of strength. And when the fast ended, it didn't explode into excess. It softened into celebration, a shared loaf, a stew with meat, a blessing before. And after the first bite, it was not the feast that mattered most. It was the waiting that came before it. The harvest feast was more than just a meal. It was the moment the year paused. Full hands, full hearts, and full bellies. For weeks the fields had been busy. Scythes in motion, carts loaded high, grains brought in, bundled and stored. It was backbreaking work, but necessary. The harvest decided the year ahead, and once it was in, people exhaled. That exhale became a celebration. In villages across the land, when the last sheaf was stacked and the barns were filled, the feast began. It wasn't always grand, but it was sacred. A moment to gather, to thank, to eat without counting. Preparation started early. The best vegetables were saved. Chickens were slaughtered. Ale was brewed. Someone brought honey. Another brought herbs. Even those with little gave what they could. A root, a loaf, a handful of apples. Children helped string garlands of ivy and dried flowers. Tables were set in long rows, sometimes outside, under a sky that still held summer's warmth. If rain threatened, the church hall or barn opened its doors. The feast began with a blessing, a prayer for the harvest past and the winter to come. People bowed heads, then raised cups, and the food followed. Pottage, thick and full of flavor. Fresh bread, still warm. Roasted turnips, stewed pears. Meat when it was possible. Eggs, cheese, butter, and always ale. Cloudy, strong, poured from heavy jugs. There were no courses, no servers, just sharing, passing, tearing, pouring. A rhythm of hands across the table. Laughter began quietly, then grew louder. Faces flushed, eyes softened. The feast was not only for the farmers. Everyone came. The smith, the washerwoman, the shepherd, the priest. No one went hungry. It was not a time for rank or distance, only for thanks. Somewhere in the corner, someone brought a pipe or a drum. A tune rose. Children danced first, then the bold ones, then everyone. Even the tired, even the old. Stories were told of past harvests, of storms survived, of the year the mill broke, of the summer the apples were sweet enough to trade for linen. These memories were shared like the food, freely, joyfully. A girl stood to recite a poem. A man sang a song half forgotten. A woman mimed a fox stealing from the grain sacks, making everyone laugh. These were the other kinds of offerings, not food, but presents. The fire burned low, lanterns flickered. No one counted hours. For once, time waited. By the end, crumbs covered the tables, bread crusts, fruit peels, empty bowls. The kind of mess that felt right, that spoke of fullness. People stayed late. Some slept on benches. Some walked home under stars, slower than usual. A child carried the last pair, saved from the feast, a symbol of enough. And in the morning, the world turned again. The chores returned, but the memory of the feast lingered. In the quiet of the next day, someone would still smile, still feel the echo of music, still taste the sweetness of stewed fruit. The harvest feast was more than a pause. It was a promise. That work could lead to joy. That hunger could give way to gratitude. That in the turning of the year, there would always be this moment, full, loud, warm, and shared. Not every dish was perfect. Some were burnt, some too bland. A pot spilled, a jug cracked, but no one minded. This was not a feast for pride. It was for presence, for being together. Some families brought bread marked with their initials. Others brought apples wrapped in linen. Each item held meaning, a gesture, a memory, a piece of themselves. The youngest, children were given first bites. Elders were offered the softest bread. Respect was baked into the meal. Outside, the air cooled. Stars peeked between clouds, and still the voices continued, low and warm, like the coals that refused to go out. Later, as dishes were stacked and benches cleared, a few stayed behind. They swept the floor, saved the crumbs for animals, and folded cloths with slow hands. These final acts were quiet, but sacred too. At home, after the feast, sleep came quickly. Dreams were filled with dancing, with bread, with light. And in the dreams, the laughter stayed. The feast ended, but it was never forgotten. It became part of the season, part of the soil, part of what it meant to live, to labor, and to hope. Because in the Middle Ages, survival was never guaranteed. But togetherness was cultivated, like grain, like trust. And the harvest feast stood as proof that there had been enough, that there would be enough again, and that joy, too, could be grown. Not all feasts came from the field. Some came from faith. The calendar was marked not just by seasons, but by saints. Days of holy memory, days of joy, days when even the poorest household found reason to celebrate. These were feast days. Scattered across the year. Annunciations, martyrdoms, miracles. Each with its own flavor, its own rituals. Villagers remembered the dates not by counting, but by rhythm. By the rising of certain stars. By the bloom of a flower. By the story told each year in the same voice, at the same time. When the bells rang early, people knew. This day would be different. On saints' days, work paused, or slowed. Children were allowed to sleep in. Fires were lit not just for cooking, but for ceremony. Clothes were washed the day before. Bread was shaped with extra care. The church was the heart of it. Candles lined the altar. Flowers stood in jars of cool water. Someone swept the floor until it shone. Someone else prepared the hymn scrolls. The priest rehearsed his words. Mass was fuller, louder. The songs were known by heart. The air smelled of beeswax and old wood. And then, after prayer, came the meal. Every household did what it could. Some baked special loaves. Others made pies with what little fruit remained. A few added herbs to the stew. Even a pinch of salt could feel like a gift. Some saints had specific foods. Fish for St. Peter. Honey. Cakes for St. Bridget. Soft white bread for the Virgin's Day. These were known, expected, repeated. Part of the faith, as much as the prayers. The joy was simple and shared. Neighbors invited one another, left doors open, passed bowls across thresholds. It was not about abundance. It was about presence. Children were told the stories. He healed the sick. She fed the poor. They walked with light in their hands. These tales were woven into the taste of the meal. Even the weather played along. Some days were gray and quiet. Others bright and loud. It didn't matter. The feast still came. And always, there was a moment of silence before the food. Heads bowed, eyes closed. A prayer not just of thanks, but of memory. The saints were not distant, not in heaven alone. They were here, in the flavor of rosemary, in the shape of a crust, in the softness of shared bread. At the end of the day, candles burned low. Songs faded. The church door closed with a soft echo. But inside the homes, peace remained. Bellies full, stories fresh, hearts lifted. These days were not escape. They were reminder that life could be more than toil. That light could shine in ordinary places, even in a loaf of bread. Some villages had processions. A quiet walk through fields or lanes with candles held aloft. Children carried ribbons. Elders carried relics, real or remembered. Songs were sung. Bells were rung not to warn, but to welcome. In wealthier towns, feast days meant theater. A simple play performed outside the church. Saints and devils in handmade masks. Laughter mixed with reverence. A story brought to life. Afterward, people lingered. A second piece of pie. Another cup of ale. Someone told a joke. Another hummed a hymn. These were soft endings. Unhurried. Even in hard years, the feast remained. Maybe smaller, maybe quieter, but still present. Faith didn't depend on plenty. It depended on belief. On these days, people remembered the sick. Food was sent to neighbors who couldn't come. A portion set aside for the widow, the injured boy, the mother with many mouths to feed. This, too, was part of the ritual. When night fell and the village grew still, the candles were snuffed. Ash was brushed from the hearth, the leftovers stored, and someone whispered, "Next year again." And they meant it, because these days were roots, deep, old, unseen. They steadied the soul. They brought light, not in grand ways, but in bread, in blessing, in being together. And when morning came, and work resumed, the memory of the feast stayed in the heart, like a prayer still echoing in the body. Hunger was no stranger in the Middle Ages. It came quietly, sometimes slowly, other times all at once. A bad harvest meant tight belts. A long winter meant empty stores. A sick cow, a spoiled barrel, a fire in the wrong place. Each could tip a family into need. Hunger had many faces. It wasn't always starvation. Sometimes it was just less. Less bread, less meat, more water in the soup, smaller portions, fewer meals. People adapted. They stretched food, used every scrap, dried old bread into crumbs, boiled bones again and again, ate weeds they once ignored, even bark in the hardest times. Children felt it most, their legs thinned, their eyes dulled. Parents gave them their own share, sometimes quietly, without a word. When hunger lingered, so did silence. Around the hearth, around the fields, it became harder to laugh, harder to sing. Neighbors noticed, some helped. A bowl passed, in secret, a loaf left on a doorstep. Others closed their doors, fearing there wouldn't be enough. The church offered alms when it could, a pot of broth, a few coins, a blessing. But even holy hands could not summon food from bare earth. Hunger also brought shame. A man who once gave now had to beg. A woman known for baking now waited near the oven for scraps. Dignity thinned like the broth. And yet, people endured. They shared what they could. They prayed. They told stories of worse years. Of the time when rain never came. Of the blight. Of the rats. They remembered and hoped. Hunger also tested the rules. Poaching rose in hard seasons. A rabbit snared in the woods. A deer stolen from the Lord's land. It was risk. It was survival. Punishments followed, but so did mercy. Some lords turned blind eyes. Some guards looked away. Everyone knew. Hunger made people bold. In the village, coping became its own kind of work. Drying herbs, foraging, saving seeds, patching holes in roofs and shoes. Anything to hold life together. When famine spread, it moved like a shadow. One village, then the next. Stories of hunger walked faster than carts. Sometimes help came. A cart from a monastery. A sack from a cousin. A traveling friar with bread and prayer. But mostly, people leaned on each other. On habits. On faith. On stubborn hope. And somehow, the season turned. A shoot broke the soil. A cow calved. Rain came when it was needed. Slowly, quietly, hunger backed away. But it never vanished. Not really. It lived. In memory. In caution. In the way people saved crumbs. In the way they blessed bread. In the silence before meals. Hunger shaped the rhythms of medieval life. Not just in times of lack, but in times of plenty. Because when you have known hunger, enough is never forgotten. A full bowl was not just food, it was safety. It was grace. And when that bowl was shared, it became something more. It became love. In some homes, hunger left marks on the walls, tally lines scratched with chalk, tracking days without meat. In others, it showed in the way people looked at bread, not as food, but as memory, as dream. Mothers told stories to ease the ache, tales of saints who turned stones into loaves, of travelers who shared their last crust and were blessed. Children listened, not just for comfort, but for belief. Songs changed too. Work songs slowed. Lullabies turned into quiet humming. Even joy needed saving. Sometimes, hunger made people strange. Tempers grew short. Neighbors turned away. A joke lost its laughter. A game ended in tears. But even then, there were moments. A hand held, a blanket shared, a soft word offered. In the worst years, the village came together. A shared pot in the square. A single fire for many homes. Bread rationed by candlelight. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And when the hunger passed, when new grain filled the sacks, when ovens baked again, when cheeks regained color, people gave thanks. Loudly, softly, in prayer, in bread, in silence. They didn't speak of it often, but it stayed. in the extra crust saved for later, in the way old people watched food be served, in the way children learned to chew slowly, gratefully. Hunger taught more than pain. It taught compassion, endurance, the quiet kind of strength that asks for nothing and gives what it can. It shaped how people lived, and how they loved. And in that love, they found what hunger could not take. Food was never just food in the Middle Ages. It was a memory, a story, a prayer. A loaf of bread could carry a season. A pot of stew could hold a family's history. Every bite remembered something. A year of plenty, a harsh winter, a grandmother's hands. Children learned early, not just to eat, but to remember. This is the cake we make on Saint's Day. This is the soup your mother made when you were born. Recipes weren't written. They were lived. Passed down by watching, by stirring, by tasting. Smells stayed longer than songs. The scent of roasted leeks meant spring. The sharp smoke of salted fish meant Lent. A sweet bun, a wedding, a burnt crust. A year when the firewood was damp. At weddings, food meant promise. A new loaf, a new table, a shared cup of ale. At funerals, it meant farewell. Dark bread, quiet spoons, stories told with full mouths and aching hearts. And in ordinary days, food meant routine. The same bowl, the same bread, but never without meaning. Each meal marked the time, a fast, a feast, a good day, a hard one. Even in silence, food spoke. It spoke of love, of effort, of someone rising early to grind grain, to stir the pot, to bake in the heat. Behind every meal, there was a hand, a face, a name. Old people remembered best. They would hold a plum and say, "These used to be sweeter," or smell a stew and close their eyes. Not to taste, but to travel, to go back, to feel again. Food was also comfort. After loss, after pain, after war, a warm bowl could say what words could not. I'm here. You're not alone. Eat and be whole again. In famine years, memories of food became sharper. The bread from before, the fat soups, the laughter around a table. Memory fed the spirit when the body could not be fed. And when abundance returned, people didn't forget. They baked the old recipes, told the old stories. They gave thanks, not just for the food, but for the return of what it meant. Even festivals were built on memory. Why this bread? Why this herb? Why this wine? Because once, long ago, someone brought it. Someone made it matter. Memory lived in the herbs women hung to dry, in the cakes baked each year the same way, in the care taken to knead, to stir, to serve. Even the land remembered. An orchard planted by a grandfather. A patch of leeks where a mother once knelt. A field that always gave barley, and never wheat. And so meals were not just for hunger. They were for remembering, for telling stories without words, for keeping people alive. Not just in body, but in spirit. To eat was to remember. And to remember was to love. Some memories were joyful. The smell of stew bubbling before a wedding. The taste of berries, eaten straight from the bush on a summer morning. The crunch of crust shared between siblings by the fire. Others were bittersweet. The soup eaten alone after someone passed. The loaf baked without a partner's hands. The meal made small so the children had enough. But all of them stayed. On feast days, people prepared dishes not just for flavor, but for memory. My mother made it this way. Your uncle always asked for this. Even those long gone had a place at the table. through what was served. There were foods people only made once a year, not because they were difficult, but because they were sacred, tied to a moment, a miracle, a season. And when people moved, the memories moved too. A woman who married into a new village brought her spice mix. A man who fled a bad harvest carried a way of roasting roots. The meals changed, but the memories held firm. In each village, food became a map, a quiet, edible record of who had come, who had stayed, who had passed through. Some memory lived in mistakes. The time the bread burned, the time the soup was too thin. And yet, those memories were kept too. Because even error was part of life, of learning, of love. Grandparents passed on not just recipes, but gestures. A way to fold dough, a way to taste for salt, a pause before serving. These small acts were remembered and repeated. Sometimes, memory arrived unannounced. A smell drifting from another house. A crumb on the tongue that reminded someone of childhood. Suddenly, a door opened, not to a room, but to a time. And so, meals became moments, anchors, threads that tied generations together. Even today, in quiet kitchens, someone might stir the pot and remember a name long gone. Smile, pause, serve. Because food does more than feed. It connects. And memory, shared through bread and broth, makes sure no one is truly forgotten. Even in times of feast and faith, hunger never felt far away. Some seasons turned suddenly. Rain came too late. Wind came too strong. And what should have been a year of plenty became a year of need. In the Middle Ages, hunger was not just a problem. It was a presence. It crept into cottages and stayed too long. It changed how people spoke, how they moved, how they shared. It often began quietly. A smaller loaf, a thinner soup, more water, fewer vegetables. Salt stretched farther than it should. And when it stayed, it settled deep. Children asked, "When will we eat more?" And parents answered gently, "Soon." They made the same bowl of pottage last 3 nights. They crushed dry crusts into a kind of porridge. They tried to smile while doing it. Hunger was patient. It waited. It grew. The poorest felt it first, then those just above. And soon, even, the comfortable began to tighten belts. In harsh years, trade slowed. The market thinned. Chickens stopped laying. Cows gave less milk. Barrels of grain were checked too often and too anxiously. People began to watch one another. Who had more? Who still had cheese? Who had turned to the forest for wild roots? Some helped, quietly. A bowl left on a step. A loaf shared without words. But others turned inward. Doors stayed shut. Trust thinned. The church called for prayer, for patience, for sharing. And when it could, it gave. Broth, dried beans, a candle to stretch the evening. But even faith does not fill a bowl. In some villages, hunger came with sickness. Thin bodies could not resist fevers. Cold months claimed more than crops. Still, life went on. People woke, walked, worked. They clung to routine like a rope in the dark. They planted again. They hoped again. And sometimes, that hope was answered. Rain came in time. A healthy lamb was born. A neighbor returned from afar with grain. A stranger left behind a sack of rye. And when food returned, it was greeted with more than joy. It was reverence. Bread was held longer before being eaten. Bowls were scraped clean and thanked. Children who had been quiet sang again. Old men laughed at fires. Women walked with lighter steps. But hunger did not disappear. It remained in memory. In the way people rationed even in good years. In the way hands trembled slightly before breaking bread. It taught a different kind of wisdom. Use what you have. Save what you can. Never waste. Never forget. Because even in peace, hunger's shadow stayed close. It taught love in small things. A white plum halved and shared. A warm drink on a cold morning. A smile passed over thin soup. In those moments, hardship softened, and hunger became something else. A reminder of how strong people could be. How kind. How careful. How deeply they could care. In many homes, hunger left habits behind. Even when food returned, people still counted loaves, still watered broth, still tucked scraps away, as if tomorrow might take them again. Mothers told stories of lean winters, not to frighten, but to teach. This is how we stretch the flour. This is how we boiled nettles with salt. Children listened wide-eyed, learning more than cooking, learning resilience. Sometimes the hunger years were marked in memory. The year the river froze, too early. The spring the barley failed. People measured time by what was missing, or by how they endured. Even joy changed. A ripe apple brought to the table in late summer was cause for a small celebration. A full pot on a Sunday felt like a feast. No one needed grandeur. They needed enough, and enough became precious. Villages learned to hold each other closer after hard years. A pot passed to a neighbor, a field replanted together, a fire kept burning through the night, not just for warmth, but for comfort. Hunger carved away at pride, but it left kindness. Quiet, lasting kindness. People remembered those who had helped, and those who had not. Memory was part of the meal. So when bread came back, it was shared. Carefully. With names spoken, heads bowed, eyes closed just a little longer. Because hunger, though bitter, had taught them what mattered. And so, in the smallest crumbs, they found something else. Enough. And each other. Food was never just survival in the Middle Ages. It was memory, identity, connection. In the quiet of daily life, meals created meaning. A slice of bread passed to a child. A stew shared after a long day. A fast observed, a feast awaited. And, in all of it, memory lived. Villagers remembered the lean years. They remembered the sweetness of a saved plum, the scent of garlic on feast days, the warmth of butter in good times. Food held stories. A crust left for a neighbor. A pot cooked the old way. A mother showing her daughter how to knead by hand. No words needed. Even scraps mattered. They reminded people of what once was and what could return. A forgotten herb rediscovered. A lost recipe told again at a hearth. There was reverence in eating, in using what the land gave, in offering what little one had, in blessing the bowl, not just for its contents, but for what it represented. Memory passed from one to another, not on pages, but on plates. Not in ink, but in spice and smoke and steam. And as the years turned, and the fields changed, and people came and went, the meals remained. Anchors, stories, acts of care. To remember through food was to keep the past alive. Softly, daily, without fanfare. And in that memory, there was strength. A strength quiet as bread rising, as warm as broth on a cold day. Food reminded them who they were, and who they hoped to be. When elders spoke, they often spoke in food. This bread? My mother made it after the frost took the barley. This stew? Only for midsummer weddings. We ate this when the baby was born, and again when she was buried. grief had its dishes. So did joy. So did silence. Even when times changed, when tools changed, when faces around the table were different, the rituals stayed. A pinch of salt dropped with care. A pot stirred clockwise. A crust broken and passed from left to right. These gestures carried more than nourishment. They carried memory. In lean times, remembering helped people endure. And in rich times, it helped them stay humble. Because no matter the season, the stories remained in the kitchen. Food remembered. Things people didn't want to forget. Like love, like loss, like laughter. A slice of bread was never just bread. It was where you were born. Who raised you. What you survived. It reminded people that they belonged. To one another. To a land. To a story. And perhaps that is why, in the final breath of every feast, someone always said, "We will make this again." Not for the hunger, but for the memory, and for the hope that in remembering, nothing is truly lost. Around the fire, old hands folded herbs into cloth, teaching not with instruction, but with rhythm. A grandmother would press dough into shape and say nothing, yet everything was understood. Children remembered the way her hands moved, the way she paused before tasting, the way she smiled, just barely, when it was right. This was heritage, not written, not stored, but lived again and again in kitchens and cellars and fields. And though seasons changed, though war and plague and fire came and went, the food and the memory always found a way back. Because to eat as your parents did, and your grandparents before them, was to honor not just the past, but the survival it took to bring you to now. In quiet kitchens and crowded halls, food was a thread, a way of saying, "We are still here." And so, the Middle Ages passed, one meal at a time. Some small, some sacred, all remembered, not in stone, not in ink, but in bread, in bowls, and in the silence before the first bite.